want, we can talk about the things that were brought up, blade throw, ice throw, tower collapse, weather radar, all of these things, the decades of doing projects, we know this is safe. You can come here right to North Dakota, the project, it's 20 years history. You can go to those communities, they've been great. They've been great economically for those places, and they've been great both, from a safety and health perspective. People invest in their farms. University of Michigan studied this. So we start there. This use that we know is a healthy, safe, and productive use of community. So then what matters to believe in that case, it was government's job then to protect people's protection of their land, their choice of how they would use their property, because that's how they express liberty. That's how they get to, that's literally what he stated as, that's how you express liberty. How do you feed your family? How do you keep your farm? How do you do those things? You choose how to economically use your property. And by doing that, that's how you're able to then express liberty in the fullest way. So when you think about that, this is what my class here is too, when we do zoning and land use, we are inherently going to take someone's right away. That can be the right thing to do. But in a situation like this, where we know it's a productive and it's great use for people, and we can do it in a healthy and safe way, the constitutionally principled way to look at that is that it's actually your duty then to protect people's choice in how to economically use their land. That is, and Professor Alkin at UCLA described as the most fundamentally misunderstood concept of the capitalist system is the protection of property rights. So as we think about other economic systems and how do we protect this freedom and liberty of use of our property, as well as our capitalist system, it's how we protect property with government systems like this. But I'll leave it at that, and I'm also happy to answer any questions on some of these other topics if anyone has any of those.
Thank you.
There's a question. There's a question.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I can't always hear exactly, but did you address that the property owner, yes, could, his property, whatever, but constitutional rights that include, if I have them, if they're being a nuisance to me, to my property, that I don't have any rights?
No, so if it gets to the point where it's a nuisance, so yeah, absolutely, and you have all the legal rights in the world to challenge anything that takes away the appropriate use of your land.
So that's what I'm just saying, there is other issues too.
Absolutely, there's other issues. You still have that legal right. So if a project came, whether it's a wind project, whether it's any other machine shop, you name it, if it's creating a nuisance, you could go to the courts and get help from that. What we know in these projects, especially, I'll tell you, you don't see the quarter-mile distance from residents most of the time. That's a great distance in most projects. Most projects couldn't withstand that, and it certainly is not necessary for anything of health and safety. 45 decibels is incredibly low. That's as low as you're going to see from New York to Wisconsin to everywhere. Michigan's higher, Kansas is higher, Oklahoma's higher, Texas is higher. So every part of the siting criteria you have now meet or exceed, frankly, significantly exceed all the health and safety issues you could want in a project. The state's given that to you, and then these ordinances go beyond that. If you do a mile, it's taking a project. You're taking every landowner's right to use their property for this use completely away. And that's the problem. So as you already have the health and safety, so absolutely, we couldn't come in and do something that wouldn't be appropriate, healthy, safe. But again, the founding fathers, Madison, Washington, Monroe, Hamilton, they were all farmers. They understood on people's lands, we do have activity. We have sounds, we have smells, we have noises, we have all those kind of things go on property. They understood that to be the right to do some people's property. It wasn't so much right, that, as they believed, to say, I moved in, I want to do a yoga studio, I would like you to stop making these noises and smells. Of course not. But it's within a limit. These projects are well within.
And all of those projects are 700 feet or more.
So I'm glad you brought that up. So the great thing about the 700 feet thing is all these restrictions continue to be adjusted to meet the height of the turbine. So you have the same sound restrictions, everything, shadow flicker, everything meets the larger. What they have to do is set back further. So they'll have greater setbacks than you would on a smaller turbine. So all you do is you get the same exact benefit. The height of the turbine doesn't change anything in relation to the protection of every single resident. But what you get are fewer turbines. So if that's kind of the goal, then you would want a taller turbine, greater setback, getting all the same protections of the turbines. And that's what the state goals and the county interior do.
So that's what we're talking. So I might be confused on this. The bigger towers, the 500 feet, which is 550 feet or whatever is that what was projected. We were told that by PRC. That's tall. That's wider than the height of a 407 tower.
It's 1.1 times.
Running.
Yeah, it's 1.1 times. So they probably said 550, assuming it's a 500-foot turbine. So it adjusts. It's a formula. So if it's 500-foot turbine, 550 is 1.1 times. And all the studies, so Dr. Jonathan Rogers at Georgia Tech has written a series of studies. General Electric, all the turbine manufacturers have as well. 1.1 times protects you from ice stroke, blade failure, tower collapse, all those things. And what the formula does is it moves it to 1.1 times. So if you get to it's not going to be 700, but if it's a 700-foot turbine, you're 770 feet setback from that property line. So adjust by the turbine. So the greater the turbine, all the things that just adjust to the greater size turbine.
As the turbine goes higher, do the propellers become longer?
They can. There will be different packages of turbines, but the way they measure that is you have the turbine, so the nacelle, and then the blades off of that. They assume the blade tip at its highest point. So if they do longer blades, you'll get a further setback. So it goes to the tip of the blade at the tallest point. So if they do bigger turbine, bigger blades, they'll all adjust for that.
And how does that affect the decibels and things like that?
Every turbine, and this is where I am not an engineer, and I don't even remotely play one, but all of them have different characteristics, and the equipment manufacturers know to put the sound output to that. The people who measure sound from that, and there's even it's ANSI, which is so national standard for how we measure and how we model for sound. Each turbine will have a different makeup, and they'll model for every turbine to the very specifics, from the nacelle factor to the blades, everything that goes into that.
And tip speed will vary also?
Yep. And but that all gets factored in, all the modeling, and like Paul said, they can't get it wrong. So if they get it wrong, they have to make sure it stops being wrong. So that's the greatest protection you have. Yeah.
One thing I don't want people to forget is right now, 80 to 90% of the time we have zero man-made overhead, just so you know. I mean, it's just natural. So 45 is a lot.
Well, so first of all, most probably won't be 45. Second, that'd be to the outside of the house, and that's the maximum. Then, if you look at the studies and what impacts, well, what people are worried about is what impacts sleep. And what the studies will show is what impacts sleep. That's where we run into
That's for them, but not me.
Well, that's what when they look from a health perspective, that's what they're looking at. Something impacts sleep.
That's not what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
I'm looking for peace.
The intermittent sound of cars, trains, and those things
Yes.
cause
Yep.
similar.
They're intermittent. They're intermittent.
Yeah. Yeah, intermittent sound would actually get
Train goes by, coyotes howl.
and that's what actually with sleep disturbance comes from intermittent sound.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Preston Meyer.
Good evening. My name is Preston Meyer. I live in New Rockford, but I farm and own land in Wells County. Warren Buffett was famously quoted saying about wind towers, they don't make sense without tax revenue. What he meant is simple. Wind towers don't make money. They're not profitable on their own. They depend on taxpayer subsidies to stay afloat. That means they're creating monetary losses. They're destroying value and diverting resources, including labor, away from places where they could do more good. Let's think about labor. It's not unlimited. We have shortages of skilled workers in countless areas: mechanics, fixing farm equipment, construction, trades, building things. If we redirect them to wind jobs, it means employers must raise wages to compete for help or go without help. Those higher wages, they're showing up in our repair bills, our grocery bills, and everything else. Now the local tax revenue, according to Century Code, 1/3 is claimed by the state. Then the state withholds 75% of the tower tax revenue going to our schools. And there are other costs, such as gravel depletion for road repairs that aren't fully offset. So these promised revenues, they're not as generous as they sound. And when we hear about the monetary pledges, communities, we should ask, where does that money come from? Where does any of the money flowing through wind companies come from? From us. From utility customers paying higher rates and taxpayers covering the subsidies. In other words, we're being incentivized with our own money. That's not a gift. It's a sophisticated cycle of wealth redistribution. From us, the consumers and taxpayers, to corporate developers and tower owners. The result, highly inflationary, higher costs, lower living standards. A fair question in this debate is, don't landowners have the right to put what they want on their land? I actually believe yes, as long as it doesn't harm others. But a 700-foot tower with flashing lights, whooshing blades, shadow flicker, possible health hazard, that's not just someone using their land. That's a nuisance to neighbors. It devalues nearby properties, disturbs rural peace, and transforms our landscape in ways many of us did not sign up for. Imagine a farmstead worth $300,000, surrounded within these minimal setbacks. What's the value of that going to become? Okay. Imagine it goes to $200,000. That's $100,000 removed in equity value from the pocket, so to speak, figuratively, of that landowner. Ironically, over in New Rockford, they're cracking down on messy yards in town, supposedly to protect neighbors from visual annoyance or lost property value. Yet rural residents are expected to accept these industrial wind turbines without the same protection. I believe we deserve equal consideration. But let me be clear, my real frustration is with government policy. This entire situation is the result of mandates and subsidies. Years ago, I thought wind energy could be a good idea for our area, but I've changed my mind because I've looked at the numbers, the economics, and the lived consequences. Before I came back to farm, I sold used cars, and occasionally we would get a buyer with cold feet who would bring the car back. No harm done. We gave them their money, they moved on. But if these towers go up, there's no return policy. No takebacks, no do-overs. So as members of the zoning board, your job is to protect the health, safety, and property value of residents. I urge you to err on the side of caution. Setbacks must be as wide as reasonably possible. In conclusion, wind towers represent a massive misallocation of labor and materials. They distort our economy, increase inflation, and lower our standard of living. They promise revenue using our own money while transferring wealth from the public to private developers. We need to think long term. Once the towers are here, they're here. Let's protect our communities and make decisions that truly serve people who live here.
Very good, very.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. My name is Larry Dan Dern. I'm the District Chair of District 14 Republican Party, and I'm here on behalf of the party. And the fact that the decisions made both in Eddy and Wells County are going to affect parts of 7 counties, potentially. One thing that comes to mind, and I brought it up before, is we basically are dealing with a continental divide on a continental divide. We got one group of people particularly fall in the line of participating landowners. We have the other group of people that aren't. The thing that's most disturbing to me is, I look at this project, they're telling us we have over 100 individuals signed up for lease agreements, that they've got over 43,000 acres of signed up land. I got involved with this because a couple landowners came up to me, property owners, that weren't involved, they're non-participants, and they're explaining to me what's going on. And I'm thinking about this, and these towers, I gotta admit, like Amy, I was on community betterment at one time. I remember when we thought wind was the greatest thing that could happen to our communities. This is a way for us to tap into the oil revenue or so forth. But that was a long time ago. And those were infinity towers on interstate, 300-foot tall. Things have changed a lot. And then the numbers that we're looking at putting out here are huge. Again, participating landowners, non-participating landowners. You share this map that's showing what a 1-mile setback is. That is a bit misleading. What I would like to propose to the county to consider is segregating those two people, those two entities.